Welcome to today's halftime show for the UUCP Touchdown Bowl. Last week, you attended the Super Bowl. We're excited to have renowned advice columnist Miss Money Matters to entertain and enlighten our audience today. In preparation for today's halftime show, Miss Matters has received questions from many of her loyal readers and listeners, especially during your congregation's annual budget drive. Let's listen in on a few of the questions and see what she has to say.
Dear Miss Matters, I love my church, but they're asking me to make a pledge. I'm not sure why they need to be so nosy about how much I put in the basket as it goes around on Sunday. I don't like being told what to do. Signed, I'm doing my bit. Get off my back.
Dear Bit, seems like you like your church community and you are mindful that the church does need and appreciate your financial support. For a moment, I'm going to ask you to imagine that you don't know what you're getting week to week in your personal income. Would you be comfortable in making any sort of financial plan or commitment without knowing with some certainty what your budget is? Can you buy a car, pay your rent? You need to know how much you have to work with. The church is no different. They need to have a reasonable idea of how much income they can plan for so that they can make commitments, like hiring a staff person or a minister or just paying the day-to-day bills. Your pledge is your promise to give a dollar amount within a period of time so that we can create a budget. It's just that simple. So your pledge, no matter how large or small, is important and appreciated.
Dear Miss Matters, I really love the people at my church, but I've noticed that when they pass the basket around each Sunday, a lot of longtime people don't put anything in it. Is the church running fine and they're not putting anything in? If the church is running fine and they're not putting anything in, I guess they must not need anything from me. Signed, I just don't get it.
Dear Get It. Yes, it does make one wonder how the heck the electric bill gets paid or the musician gets paid or even the order of service. How does that get printed? And it's good old internet and banks and credit unions that explain why you don't see everybody putting something into the basket. Increasingly, people are setting up their donations to the church to be paid on a regular basis, automatically, which is super convenient. But if that isn't your preference, please continue to put your check in the basket as it's passed around. And if you're giving cash, get an envelope and put your name on it so that you can get credit for your contribution.
Dear Miss Matters, someone told me they weren't a member of the church. I see them around a lot, really involved and active, always helping out and attending special events. She said she was a, quote, friend. What's the difference anyway? Does it have anything to do with donating and volunteering, signing, asking for a friend?
Dear Asking, although most people you see regularly at church are indeed members, there is another status called friend. Friends are quite similar to members, but different in some important ways. The most important is that only members can hold elected or appointed positions and can vote on congregational matters. One way that they are the same is both members and friends are expected, and that's an emphasis, expected, to contribute to the church. though both participation and making a financial donation of record. Many, although not all friends, change their status from friend to member when they're ready, but it's not required. By the way, making a donation of record means that your friend either writes a check or if they give cash, they put it in an envelope with their name on it. Friends are encouraged to make an annual pledge during the budget drive.
Well, listeners, this concludes today's broadcast of Miss Money Matters, a former Treasurer's production made possible by the generosity of you in the listening audience. Tune in next week when Miss Matters advises more people with more problems, to include somebody who's living on the edge and a wannabe big spender. Don't forget, you can always ask Miss Matters. Her authorized local contacts are Mary Lee Donnelly, Erin Renfro, and Laurie Winterberg. Thank you.
Let me take us into a moment of thoughtful meditation with words from Howard Thurman. There is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have. And if you cannot hear it, you will, all of your life, spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. I invite you now to join in singing hymn number 318, We Would Be One. So several years ago, there was a presentation of a movie in Huntsville. The movie was called Constellation. Anybody remember that or hear about that? It was dealing with interracial love. The setting was Huntsville, and the time was back in the mid-1900s. So, difficult time. And one of the actresses was Ray Dawn Chong, who I later realized was Tommy Chong of Cheech and Chong's daughter. So while I was listening to her, I didn't even know that. Anyway, the people invited for that presentation that day before it sort of hit the big screen, but then it really kind of didn't make it to be such a big hit, were clergy from the city. And then prior to the movie, there was a panel discussion, and Ray Dawn Chong asked the people on the panel, if you had the chance to die today for the cause of civil rights, would you do it? Now imagine being hit with that question just right out of the blue on a Sunday afternoon in a theater. And then if the person responding didn't give an unequivocal yes, she would just kind of move on and say, that's a no, and move on to the next person. Now contrast that with the question in a quote from Dr. Howard Thurman, a theologian and African American who inspired not only Martin Luther King Jr., but many of the thinkers and activists of the civil rights movement. Thurman said, ask not what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive. Then go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So there needs to be some way that we come alive. And to be asked that question in a theater on a Sunday afternoon, maybe we're not very alive at that moment. So the answer might be different if you're caught up in a cause and you're marching and singing and feeling the support of a community. I imagine that people who take great risks for great causes believe in the cause, and they do what they do out of a passion for life, because in that doing, they feel alive. And the risk of death is not the greatest consequence. Doing nothing is already a no to life and a kind of spiritual death. As his fame grew and he contemplated the growing danger to his own life, Martin Luther King Jr. sought advice from Howard Thurman, which leads me to believe that Martin Luther King hoped not to suffer death as a consequence of his actions, but was willing, nevertheless, to take the risk. King had a copy of Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited, which was published in 1949 by our own Beacon Press out of the UUA. And MLK carried that book with him when he went to Selma to march. Over the years, I've realized that the real genius of the civil rights movement was the undergirding of a theology that linked head and heart, intellect and passion in a unity that inspired a moral and spiritual movement. It was centered in principles of nonviolence and clear thinking. People came alive. At the center of the movement was a spiritual core that enabled people to keep their eyes on the prize. The prize was the unity of the human family. Howard Thurman spent his life and his career seeking an answer to the question, what is the universal essence at the heart and core of the human experience that unites us undeniably as brothers and sisters of the one human family? A seeker, a scholar, a preacher, a prophet, a mystic, and poet. We haven't heard a lot about Howard Thurman. Although Buddhists, Quakers, Jews, and Unitarians have all claimed inspiration from him, and just last night after I had prepared all of this, I saw that there's actually going to be a PBS documentary about Howard Thurman, or maybe it's already happened. It's already happened. It's saying it's going to be on today at 4 o'clock, but maybe it's at different times in different places. Okay. Was it good? Did you see it? Did you see it? So I'm going to look for it and watch it, and if you saw it, maybe you will know everything I'm going to tell you today. Even before James Cone developed his Black liberation theology, Thurman was teaching that the gospel of Jesus was a survival technique for oppressed people. Jesus himself was a member of an oppressed minority, being brutalized by a dominant power. In an interview shortly before his death, Dr. Thurman explained, "What Jesus discovered with his back against the wall," which is the name of the documentary, "gives me courage that if I can find a clue to that discovery, I can deal with myself with my back against the wall and not internalize my condition so as to be defeated by it." Growing up on the outskirts of Daytona Beach, when segregation was definitely the rule of the day, Howard rarely crossed over the river to the real part of Daytona. It was considered ethically out of bounds. Howard was only 7 years old when his father died, and his grandmother, a former slave, helped to raise him. Howard was standing with his mother at his father's bedside when she asked, "Saul, are you ready to die?" "Yes," he answered. He had faced much in his life and was not afraid of death. "I can meet it," he said. There were only white undertakers back then, and none of them would prepare the body, and so the family had to do that. The neighbors helped pay for the coffin, which was a huge expense. The minister in town refused to do the service or allow it to take place in the church because, in the language of the time, he had died out of Christ and therefore was a sinner. Howard's grandmother saw to it that the deacons found a way to make sure the funeral took place in the church, and then found a traveling evangelist who was willing to do the service. Howard sat on the mourner's bench with his mother and his grandmother. "I listened with wonderment, then anger, and finally mounting rage," he wrote, "as Sam Cromart preached my father into hell." This was his chance to illustrate what would happen to sinners who died out of Christ, as my father had done. Under my breath, I kept whispering to Mama, "He didn't know Papa, did he?" At that young age, he vowed he would never go to church again. In his autobiography, Thurman's With Head and Heart, Thurman wrote, "When I was young, I found more companionship in nature than I did in people. The woods befriended me. In the long summer days, most of my time was divided between fishing in the Halifax River and exploring the woods, where I picked huckleberries and gathered orange blossoms from abandoned orange groves. The quiet, even the danger of the woods provided my rather lonely spirit with a sense of belonging that did not depend on human relationships. I was usually with a group of boys as we explored the woods, but I tended to wander away to be alone for a time, for in that way I could sense the strength of the quiet and the aliveness of the woods." A lot of this I learned from Dr. Alton Pollard, who at that time, when he was talking to a group of UU ministers, was head of the Black Church Studies at Candler Theological School, and now he's president and professor of theology at Louisville Presbyterian Divinity School. But as Dr. Pollard put it, there is something about a mother and a grandmother that can make a boy's plans go awry. Either that, or I thought he had a profoundly strong call to a religious life. But in any case, at age 12, Howard Thurman was ready to make his profession of faith, which had to be a public declaration, much to the dismay of the pastor and the leadership of the church, because they believed that he was already too unorthodox, and they refused to baptize him. But once again, Mom and Grandmom got involved and set the preacher straight. Now, public education ended at 7th grade for black children in Daytona. 8th grade was required for admission to high school. So when Howard finished the 7th grade, his principal volunteered to teach him the 8th grade on his own time. The superintendent agreed to this, but insisted that he would give the final exam, which Howard passed. Then there were only 3 public high schools that he could attend in the state of Florida at that time, although there were several private schools. The closest was in Jacksonville. He scrubbed floors and did physical work to earn the money, and the church chipped in. On the day that he was leaving to go for the high school, he was at the train station with his belongings packed in a borrowed trunk that was wrapped in rope because it didn't have any handles. The ticket agent refused to check the trunk because the rule was that the claim check had to be attached to the handle, not a rope. It would have to be sent express, and of course he did not have the money to pay for that. He was sitting on the steps sobbing when a man came up. It was a black man, wrote Thurman, dressed in overalls and a denim cap. "Boy, what in the hell are you crying about?" he said. And when Howard explained, the man said, "If you are trying to get out of this damn town to get an education, the least I can do is help you. Come with me," he said. The man paid the agent to have the trunk sent and then turned and disappeared. Howard never saw him again. However, he dedicated his autobiography to "The Stranger in the Railroad Station in Daytona Beach, who restored my broken dream 65 years ago." Thurman made a decision then that if he could ever help another person with gaining an education, he would. And then later he established a scholarship fund. He graduated valedictorian of his high school and of Morehouse College in Georgia, where he studied religion. He won every rhetorical and literary prize in order to pay his way through school. 2 men at Rochester had a tremendous influence on Howard's thinking. A professor of philosophy and history of religion who helped define for Thurman what he had been intuiting, that the spiritual experience of the human race was essentially one single experience. And Dr. George Cross, professor of systematic theology, who told Thurman, "Address your mind to the timeless questions of the human spirit. You have that kind of mind." So Thurman went on to graduate again as valedictorian from Colgate Rochester Seminary, and then in 1926 he became the pastor of a small Baptist church in Oberlin. The questions that mattered to Thurman were, who am I and what am I called to do in the world? His search for answers was a spiritual search, and education was an important part of that search. His was in no way a New Age spirituality concerned with who am I for the sake of his own fulfillment. Who am I? And knowing who I am, his goal was to know how he could put to the best use in healing divisions who he was in the world. He had learned in so many ways by that time what it meant to be an outsider. He knew plenty of the pain and suffering of his people. In his book, The Luminous Darkness, he wrote, "The fact that the first 23 years of my life were spent in Florida and in Georgia has left its deep scars in my spirit and has rendered me terribly sensitive to the churning abyss separating white from black. Living outside of the region, I am aware of the national span of racial prejudice and the virus of segregation that undermines the vitality of American life. Nevertheless, knowing all of that, experiencing all of that, a strange necessity has been laid upon me to devote my life to the central concern that transcends the walls that divide and would achieve in literal fact what is experienced as literal truth. Human life is one, and all men and women are members one of another." His life story is testimony to the commitment and concern he had. While serving as pastor in Oberlin, a Chinese gentleman who had been coming to his church every Sunday for several weeks came to see him to say goodbye because he was going back to China, and he wanted to express his appreciation for the experience of worship there. He said, "When I close my eyes and listen with my spirit, I am in my Buddhist temple, experiencing the renewing of my spirit." Thurman explained that he knew then what he had only sensed before. The barriers were crumbling. He knew he was breaking new ground, yet it would be many years before he would understand the nature of the breakthrough. In 1935, Thurman was on leave of absence from Howard University, where he served as the dean of the chapel and professor of systematic theology. He left to travel with his wife, Sue, to India with a group of young people. And while there, they met Rabindranath Tagore, we have some readings by him in our book, in our hymnal, and were invited to meet with Gandhi. After being personally greeted and welcomed by Gandhi, they entered a tent and sat on the floor to talk. Now, knowing that Thurman had a train to catch, Gandhi took out his silver watch, laid it in front of him, and said, "We have 3 hours to talk. Let's not waste a moment." And these two deeply spiritual men talked about the universality of suffering and struggling against oppressive forces. Gandhi wanted to know what it was like to be black in America. Thurman wanted to know what of the nonviolent struggle was going on in India that could be relevant to what might go on in the United States. Toward the end of the time, Howard Thurman asked Gandhi, "What is the greatest enemy that Jesus Christ has in India?" Gandhi's reply, "Christianity." Throughout India, Thurman met people who wondered how he could be a Christian when it was Christians that enslaved the African people. It was on this trip that Thurman became clear in his own mind about the distinction between Christianity and the religion of Jesus. The religion of Jesus spoke to persons like he, who have been disinherited by the borders, who have their backs against the wall. In India, as part of his search for common ground, Thurman wanted to get to the essence of the religious experience of Hinduism. "I wanted to find," he wrote, "my way to the place where I could stand side by side with a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Muslim, and know that the authenticity of his experience was identical with the essence and authenticity of my own." There began to emerge a growing concept in his mind, which only in recent years I have been able to state categorically, namely that, this is him, the things that are true in any religious experience are to be found in the religious experience precisely because they are true. They are not true simply because they are found in that religious experience. It is not the context that determines validity, he said. On any road, on any turning, a man may come upon the burning bush and hear a voice say, "Take off your shoes, because the place where you are now standing is a holy place, even though you did not know it before." Along with Dr. Alfred Fisk, Howard Thurman founded the interracial, interfaith Church of the Fellowship of All Peoples in San Francisco in 1944, the first interracial, multicultural congregation in the United States. The inaugural event for the church was held at the First Unitarian Church of San Francisco. This was the same year that King graduated from high school. The next year, he enrolled at Morehouse College. One writer pointed out 20 years before King linked Mohandas Gandhi's nonviolent tactics to the movement, Thurman already had visited India and talked with Gandhi about the subject. And then remember that Thurman became a mentor to King and was friends with his father. And 70 years before September 11th, when interfaith dialogue and ecumenical services became trendy, although, we had been doing that quite a while, Thurman already was preaching universal salvation and meeting with leaders of other faiths. So you can see why he has been important to Unitarian Universalists. You do not get a king without a Thurman, says Walter Fluker, director and editor of the Howard Thurman Papers project at Morehouse College, because great leaders do not arise out of historical vacuums. For each of us, there is a path to take, to be fully alive and to serve the world. May this space offer spiritual sustenance for our search. I invite you now to rise as your body or spirit allow, and let us sing together hymn 95, "There is More Love Somewhere."
All right, our closing words are by Howard Thurman. You can join me. They're in the back of your hymnal, number 498. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of the holy, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in good times or in tempests I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. Now, if you will join us for our closing hymn, you may rise in body or spirit. Number 131, Love Will Guide Us.
May we move forward from this place with love in our hearts, and whether we can sing like angels or speak like orators, we can give from deep within ourselves, and we can change the world. Let us go in peace.